My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of humans during the fascinating times when the desire of ages, Jesus the Messiah, came to this earth. And they're collected in this book, Victory of the Warrior King, the story of the life of Jesus. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words Parental Guidance recommended. Sarah, Golgotha, Passover. Sarah let go of Mary Magdalene's hand as the darkness cleared. Cautiously checking to see if any of the Roman guards were looking her way, she took a step toward the cross. "He's not breathing anymore," she said quietly. Mary started to wail, but Sarah clamped her hand over the other woman's mouth. "Shh, there will be time for that later. What can we do?" Mary collected herself, threw back her shoulders, and drew herself up to her full height. "We have to find a way to get his body," she said. "I have a tomb made empty by Yeshua himself, our family burial chamber, where Lazarus was not too long ago. To shame us, the Romans won't let us have the bodies of those they crucify. But perhaps we can steal Yeshua's body if they leave it on the cross. We must make a plan." Slowly, Sarah shook her head. "I don't think we can do that. There are too many people here who would not want us to get him." "Keep thinking," Mary persisted. "We must think of a plan." Elihu ben Malchus, Golgotha, Passover. As the two women discussed Jesus' body, Elihu stood behind them. Not far from him watched two wealthy members of the Sanhedrin, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Elihu knew who they were because his father had told him about them. Both of them were moderates, who had advised against violence toward Yeshua of Nazareth during previous discussions. Later, the ruling body had carefully excluded them from the high priest meetings and the gathering of the Sanhedrin the night before, when Yeshua had been brought before them for judgment. Both men had been afraid to speak out too strongly in the past. Now, fear no longer held them back. "You know the Roman procedure," Nicodemus said to Joseph. "They let the bodies hang on the cross until they rot. Even to ask for a victim's body is to invite our own immediate execution. The best we can hope for him is a criminal's burial." Yes, Joseph said, ignoring the danger. "But he's not a criminal. Pilate said so himself." "So what are you proposing?" "Well, why don't I talk to Pilate?" "Pilate?" Nicodemus echoed. "Yes, Pilate. I'd rather not deal with Caiaphas or Annas." "You're right. You're better off with Pilate. And I'll buy some spices to embalm him." Elihu stared in amazement. He wondered if Joseph and Nicodemus would meet the same fate as their master had. Antonia Fortress, Jerusalem, Passover. As soon as the earthquake stopped, Antonia's father had growled, "Petronius, this is no place for my daughter. Get her back to the fortress immediately." "Yes, sir," Petronius said, and then glanced meaningfully toward Claudia. Antonia's father glanced at the woman, then stared. "Oh," he stammered. "My lady, I did not realize it was you." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "That's why we're dressed like this. Petronius, take us back to the fortress." The Roman servant hurried them back up toward Jerusalem. As they entered the residential portion of the fortress, they realized they weren't alone. Joseph of Arimathea was talking with Pilate. "How can that be?" Pilate demanded. "And why hasn't anyone told me? No one dies of crucifixion in only 6 hours. "Well," Joseph replied cautiously, "he had been scourged and suffered much other abuse during the night." "Well, yes, I suppose so," Pilate said, calming a little. "But I just have never heard of anyone dying in only 6 hours. The whole point of crucifixion is to keep the victim
Never mind. Why didn't anyone tell me?
He paced back and forth, shouting at the guards. They wisely did not answer. After patiently waiting for Pilate to cool down, the Judean leader continued.
The issue of how he died within 6 hours is not as important to me as what happens next. I am concerned about his body. I wish to bury him.
The Roman official glared at them.
You know our policy.
The Judean bowed and remained silent. Pilate studied him and seemed to be lost in thought. Finally, he declared,
So bury him. What is that to me? I'm not a Judean.
According to law, anyone who is executed for treason must have a criminal's burial.
Are you here representing the priests in the Sanhedrin?
No, sir.
You are a disciple of his?
Joseph stared at the floor and then replied,
I have been a cowardly disciple until now. Although I did not support him during his life, I will support him now. I have a new tomb that has never been used and wish to give him a burial fit for the most noble Judean in all the country. I would be honored if I could bury him there.
Pilate chuckled.
Well, and suppose I did release his body to you. That would irritate your temple leaders, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir?
Joseph answered slowly. Making a decision, the Roman official snapped.
Take his body. Give him a royal burial. After all,
he said with a smirk,
he is the king of the Jews.
Antonia looked at Pilate's wife. Elihu ben Malchus, Golgotha. Elihu looked up as he saw the two wealthy men hurrying toward the foot of the cross. He edged closer, trying to hear their conversation with the centurions, but he couldn't make out the words. Then the heavier of the two men pulled a parchment from his sleeve and handed it to the centurion, who broke the seal and opened it and read the instructions.
All right,
the Roman officer said to his men. Let's take him down.
No, a nearby priest shouted. Absolutely not.
The centurion turned and stood with his legs wide apart, his arms crossed over his chest.
No? Are you overruling an order from Pilate, or did I misunderstand you? We could replace him with you.
No, that is, yes, I mean, yes, you misunderstood me, the priest stammered. Did Pilate say he would be allowed to be buried?
He's dead,
the centurion pointed out sarcastically. Are you sure he's dead? Asked the priest suspiciously. Are you suggesting that after years of being a soldier, I can't tell a dead man from a live one? The centurion replied softly, resting his hand on the hilt of his sword. No, I wouldn't be implying that. So now may we have permission to go ahead with Pilate's orders? The centurion sneered. Certainly, the priest stammered, stepping back. Sarah, Garden Tomb, Jerusalem, Passover. Sarah kept her arm firmly around Mary Magdalene's waist to support her as the disciple John held Mary, Yeshua's mother. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took Yeshua down from the cross. After wrapping his limp body carefully in a linen sheet with expensive embalming spices that Nicodemus had bought, they carried it to Joseph's new tomb, which fortunately was not far from the crucifixion site. At the tomb, 3 of the disciples unwrapped the linen enough to straighten Yeshua's limbs and pull the matted hair back from his face. They folded his hands on his chest.
We'll come back early in the morning on Sunday,
Sarah suggested.
I just hate to leave him here,
Yeshua's mother cried. The next day, a group of soldiers marched into the garden.
Whose idea was this?
One soldier asked.
We usually not ask to guard people as cooperative as this one is going to be.
He gestured toward the tomb.
That's what the priests want, and Pilate seems to want to make him happy. So we're going to stand here and guard him
so he doesn't run away in the night, one of the other soldiers replied. The first soldier nodded in a bored way. The soldiers wasted no time in attaching a large Roman seal to the tomb. Now it would be breaking the law to enter it, or to touch the body of Yeshua of Nazareth. Elihu ben Malchus, Temple in Jerusalem, Passover weekend, Sabbath. Usually Elihu loved Passover. Everyone came to Jerusalem, and Sabbath was the best. But there was no joy in the celebrations this year. Even though the sun was shining and the temple looked dazzling as usual, it seemed as if a dark pall hung over everyone. The priests mumbled nervously to one another, and everyone on temple duty was especially jumpy. "Elihu!" barked a familiar voice. The boy jumped and turned. "Yes, sir," he answered, bowing his head respectfully. It was Caiaphas, the high priest himself. "How is your father doing?" "He is still resting at home," the boy answered. "Is his ear healing?" "Oh, yes, his ear is perfect. Yeshua of Nazareth reattached it, and it is just—" Yes, Caiaphas interrupted. "I know the story. So what is his problem?" "He says it is his stomach," the boy answered carefully. My stomach hasn't been well since then either. Well, tell him to take whatever remedy he requires to get back on the job. I need him back as soon as possible. The people are very restless. Many of them brought their sick, hoping to be healed by that Nazarene, and they're angry that he's been executed." Elihu had heard people discussing it as he had watched the crowds coming and going. "If that isn't bad enough," the high priest continued, "apparently he had circulated some rumors among his followers about how he would arise on the third day after his death. This is not good. The other members of the Sanhedrin are meeting with us this afternoon to decide what to do about it. I really need your father. He runs my household. Without him, especially at a time like this, the other servants are nervous. We've had several disappear," he said confidentially. The boy bowed. "I will give him your message, sir." "Good, and be quick about it." Turning abruptly, he walked back toward the temple. Elihu took a deep breath and headed for home. Sarah, Garden of Joseph of Arimathea, Passover Sunday. Sarah had not slept much. How could she, after all that had happened? She and Mary Magdalene had gotten up since they couldn't sleep anyway. Mary still had a fair amount of money left over from her past life. She and Sarah had gone to the market and bought as much embalming perfume as Mary could afford. Now they crept out toward Joseph of Arimathea's garden through the darkness. The terrain was rough, so they held on to each other as they walked, but said nothing. They had nothing left to say, after the events of the past few days, but they both sensed that they were closer as friends than they had ever been. Tremors still shook the ground, and on their way to the garden another one rippled the earth. Both women fell to the ground and lay there clinging to each other.
"Mary, do you think the world is coming to an end?"
"I don't know," she whispered. "It may be that the earth is angry because we humans have killed the Messiah." When the shaking stopped, they stood on their wobbly legs and gathered up their perfume and belongings to continue toward the tomb.
"What are we going to do when we get there?"
Sarah asked.
"That stone they rolled in front of the grave is heavier than we can move. And I heard that Pilate had the soldiers seal it. You know what that means."
"Maybe they just sealed it with cords," Mary suggested.
"Maybe. Do you suppose if we ask them really nicely—"
"Let me do that," Mary suggested. "I'm good at that. I may be able to talk them into rolling the stone back and allowing us to enter. After we finish, we can get the soldiers to put the stone back before it's light."
"Do you think they will let us?"
Mary shrugged. "I don't know, but if anyone can talk them into it, it should be me." As they came in sight of the garden tomb, they stared in shock. The stone had been flung to the side, and the soldiers were gone.
"No!"
Mary shrieked. She turned and fled.
"Wait for me!"
Her friend called, but Mary had vanished. Unsure of the way back to where they were staying, Sarah found a little nook and hid in the bushes. What had happened at the tomb? Could someone have taken Yeshua's body? Was it the final insult to his memory? She sat quietly, not understanding, as the tears rolled down her cheeks. Surely someone else that she might know would come to the garden soon and help her find her way back. In the meantime, she would just wait. If she couldn't be near Yeshua, the next best thing was to be near where he had been last. Resting her head on her arms, she burst into more sobs. It wasn't long before she heard footsteps and whispers. A few streaks of light dotted the eastern sky, but it was still dark. She pulled her cloak up over her head so that only her eyes were peeking out. In the darkness and with the foliage, perhaps no one would notice her. As the visitors rounded the corner so that she could see who they were, they screamed in astonishment. I had been waiting for them, or anyone who would come close enough to the tomb. Heaven had given me permission to materialize, and I sat on the right side of the tomb entrance, ready to explain what had happened. Even though I am not one of the warriors or guardians, the people acted just as frightened at the sight of me. I tried to comfort them and spoke loud enough that I hoped Sarah could hear it from her hiding place.
"Don't be afraid,"
I said.
"I know what you're here for. You're looking for Yeshua who was crucified. He isn't here, but his body was not stolen. He's alive. He's risen. Come, look."
They took a few steps into the tomb.
"See, here is the cloth he was wrapped in, and here is the napkin that was over his face."
Mary, the mother of James, reached out and rubbed the material between her fingers.
"This is the cloth," she said. "Look, Salome. Remember Friday when Joseph brought this over? We both felt it because it's such high-quality linen. The weave is—" Yes, Salome interrupted. "Who cares about the weaving? Where is Yeshua?"
Patiently, I smiled and answered. "He is alive, and you will see him. But right now go back and tell the other disciples and Peter that he has left here. He's heading for Galilee, and you should go there too. He'll meet you there."
"Peter?" Salome questioned. "You know that none of us are really talking to him right now."
I nodded. "Yeshua wants you to tell Peter too. Please tell the disciples and Peter to meet him in Galilee."
"Oh," Mary gasped. "Peter will be so relieved. He's feeling terrible." "He ought to," Salome snapped.
Finally, my message sank in. They turned to each other.
"Oh, let's go tell them," they shouted and ran from the tomb.
I shook my head. Sarah couldn't follow them back either, for they were gone before she realized what had happened. She still continued to crouch in the bushes, not knowing what to do. But I was there with her, along with many others whom she just couldn't see. Light was starting to pour across the horizon. It was going to be a good day. This broadcast has come from the book Victory of the Warrior King by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.